Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Tarpon Springs, located in the heart of the walkable Tarpon Springs Historic District and known as the home of the Innes paintings. We are a liberal community for all ages, promoting spiritual growth, social justice, and the arts. I'm Reverend Christina Spouty, minister here of UUCTS. I'm glad you are here. I hope that you find meaning in today's service. Please consider joining us on a Sunday morning when we gather to worship as a community every week beginning at 10:30 a.m. on Zoom, or drop in for a more personal visit to one of our coffee hours starting at 11:30 on Sundays on Zoom. Please refer to our website for information about how to connect with us on Zoom. Our service associate will now begin today's service. Let us enter this sacred time with open minds and open hearts.
Welcome and greetings, dear friends. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Tarpon Springs. We are so glad that you have found us this day. To those of you who are finding us for the first time, welcome. And thank you for being with us in our virtual sanctuary of the soul. My name is Betty Lou Cummins, and I am pleased to be your service associate today. We offer warm welcomes to all who are with us in our virtual reality. If you have been lonely during our long troubled time of COVID, with us you will find a warm companionship. If you are afraid or if you have been hurt, if you ache with fatigue, here you will find rest. You will be comforted, your spiritual wounds will be dressed, and your courage will be returned to you. If you seek to understand, here you will be encouraged in your search. New pathways will be lit for you, and wherever your journeys take you, you will know that you can always come home again to this place, made sacred by our love. We are a church of many welcomes. I welcome you now, and I hope that we can greet you in person on a future pandemic-free day at our location in Tarpon Springs. As Unitarian Universalists, we believe in the worth and dignity of each human being. Each person on earth has an equal claim to life, liberty, and justice, and no idea, ideal, or philosophy is superior to a single human life. We welcome all thoughtful people to journey through life's mystery with us. We want to walk with you on the way of holiness and happiness, justice and service. We hope that you feel the blessings of love through your time in our presence. As a congregation, we seek to create a diverse and accepting community based on the principles of our faith, Unitarian Universalism, and we are drawn together in voluntary loyalty. We believe that we need not think alike to love alike. Our message today will be brought to us by Reverend Jim Lewis. Reverend Jim is a recent transplant from the San Francisco Bay Area, where he served as a hospice chaplain and bereavement coordinator, and as a consulting minister for Mount Diablo Unitarian Universalist Church. He is a graduate of Starr King School for the Ministry. In a previous lifetime, he was a singer and elementary music teacher in Kansas City, Missouri. The musical portion of our service will be provided by our musical director, Bonnie Whitehurst. We come now to our chalice lighting.
Good morning, UU Church of Tarpon Springs. I'm the Reverend Jim Lewis, pronouns he or they, and let me start today with a little true story for all of us by Lynn Unger and Michelle Richards. And it's about somebody in our Unitarian Universalist history who was doing some things that led us to be progressive and maybe have something to do with where we are today even. So, we hear from some people nowadays, and throughout some history, that science and religion are two things that just don't go together. One relies on facts, which can be proven. The other relies on faith and intuition. However, science and religion have a lot in common. They both inspire wonder, questioning, and seeking of truth. So for at least one person about 250 years ago, quite a while ago, the British Unitarian, Joseph Priestley, religion and science were two ways of exploring the world and seeking truth. To him, they were not polar opposites, in conflict with one another, but two complementary avenues of discovery. Joseph Priestley is best known as the scientist who discovered the presence of oxygen. He discovered that plants and trees generate oxygen, and he determined that living creatures need oxygen to breathe. Today we take that idea for granted. I surely know I do. I don't think about what I am breathing all of the time. Like most of us, I just kind of do it. And maybe you've already learned about oxygen and breathing and how that's what we breathe in school. But way back in the day, when Joseph Priestley was around and discovering oxygen, trying to prove that something existed that you couldn't see, that you couldn't smell, you couldn't hear it, you couldn't touch it or taste it, it was very difficult. So back in those days, the Unitarian religion was already a home for people who believed that we could each discover our own faith truth. And Joseph Priestley was a Unitarian minister in Britain. He saw no contradiction between seeking truth through faith and intuition and seeking truth through methods of science. So during the years he was using science to explore air, gases, electricity, and other physical matters in our world, Joseph Priestley also wrote about religious matters. In one, he proposed that the soul was a divine substance, incomprehensible to human beings. He even taught both of these subjects together at prestigious universities in England. But lots of people disagreed with his ideas, particularly his religious beliefs. In 1791, an angry mob destroyed his family's home, along with two places that Joseph Priestley sought truth: his laboratory and his church. The buildings were destroyed, along with many important papers, books, and notes on his experiments. Joseph and his wife decided to leave England and move to the United States. You might think having lost everything and being forced to start over in a new country would make Joseph less interested in pursuing his free-thinking ideas. But you would be wrong. Even as his family resettled, he continued his experiments in science and his explorations in faith. He discovered the poisonous gas carbon monoxide in 1799, and for this he's known as the father of modern chemistry. Well, that's kind of a big title if you ask me. Wow, because chemistry is kind of a big deal today. And he continued even then to pursue his love of religion. He was the first Unitarian minister in the United States, and he helped found the Unitarian Church in Philadelphia. So Joseph Priestley really, in a way, kind of held some of this space for us to do progressive things that a lot of churches weren't doing at the time. The Unitarian Church in Britain was, but this was not something that was common for all of us, thinking about how faith and science fit together. So it's one of those ways in which Joseph Priestley, a Unitarian way back 250-ish years ago, was creating new ways of thinking and being. Thank you for this time together in a story, and let us continue with worship.
Sometimes I lay under the moon and thank God I'm breathing. Then I pray, don't take me soon, 'cause I am here for a reason. Sometimes in my tears I drown, but I never let it get me down. So when negativity surrounds, I know someday it'll all turn around, because all my life I've been waiting for, I've been praying for the people to say that we don't want to fight no more. There'll be no more wars, and our children will play. One day, one day, one day. It's not about win or lose, 'cause we all lose when they feed on the souls of the innocent. Blood-drenched pavement, keep on moving though the waters stay raging. And in this space you can lose your way, your way. It might drive you crazy, but don't let it phase you. No way, no way. All my life I've been waiting for, I've been praying for all the people to say that we don't want to fight no more. There'll be no more wars, and our children will play. One day, one day, one day. One day this all will change, treat people the same. Stop with the violence, down with the hate. One day we'll all be free and proud to be under the same sun, singing songs of freedom like one day, one day, one day. All my life I've been waiting for, I've been praying for the people to say that we don't want to fight no more. There'll be no more wars, and our children will play. One day, one day, one day. One day, one day, one day, one
This morning I have two readings that will lead us into our sermon. The first one is excerpts from Unitarian minister Dr. George Dodson's article, Clear Thinking or Death, written in 1921, stating that, of course, a belief in God is central to Unitarianism. Of course, this is not necessarily what we as Unitarian Universalists believe today, so be prepared to hear some things that you might not necessarily agree with. This was not the beginning of that conversation, by the way, but it did start a conversation in the Unitarian newspaper at the time, which was called the Christian Register, kind of like our UU World today. Dr. George Dodson, Clear Thinking or Death from 1921. We have assumed, and were justified in the assumption, that in our use of liberty, we had a common faith in God and man, and that our churches were formed for worship and communion with God. With practical unanimity, Unitarians throughout their history have held a rational faith, which has actually been the basis of their fellowship. though they have refused formally to require it. This has naturally puzzled our religious neighbors. How indeed could they be expected to understand us when we declared our faith to be without content, and all the while that content was so generally held that we never thought of doubting it? Now, however, we find that theism is being denied by men who speak as representatives of our movement, and who feel that they have a right to do so, since we stand for nothing but the liberty to stand for anything or nothing at all. Please observe that I am not raising an issue. All that seems clear is that we must avow our faith in God, even though the statement of that faith may remind us of a creed. And our second reading today is an excerpt from one of the responses to this article, from well-known humanist Unitarian minister of the time, Curtis Reese. This was in the Letters to the Editor section of the Christian Register later in 1921. You may agree with all, some, or none of what he says, as the word humanism has been interpreted differently by many different people in many different times. But he was one of the main advocates for humanism within Unitarianism at the time. Reverend Curtis Reese. Religion is the way we relate ourselves to the values we find or create, not what we believe about the ultimate nature of the universe. Theism is a respectable philosophical hypothesis. Nothing more. Hardly any two theists could agree on a definition of terms. Nor could the humanists, for that matter. What kind of theism are we to avow? Monistic? Pluralistic? Realistic? It is a bit hazardous to style a man an atheist for not accepting a purely philosophical hypothesis. If by atheism is meant the denial of a power greater than oneself, there are no atheists. Theism is philosophically possible, but not religiously necessary. Those are our readings for today.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Stay in
It's time for the offering for the work and the welfare of this church. Please go to our website, uutarpon.org, and click on the donate button. Or please send your checks to 57 Reed Street. The entire address is right there on your screen. And thank you.
So, there I was, teaching music to 5th grade students in Kansas City, Missouri. Now, on this particular day, we were starting to learn about drum circles and creating music communally through improvisation. I look across the circle, and there is one of my students, with his arms pulled up into his shirt and wiggling in a goofy manner. Now, I often appreciate goofiness, but not as much when we were trying to be productive. So I say to him, okay, put your arms back in your shirt. And he says, okay, Mr. Lewis. And I turn away as the drum's going around the circle. And I turn to look at him again, and just his hands are poking out from his shirt sleeves. All right, put your arms in your sleeves. But they are in my sleeves. No, put your whole arm in your sleeve. Okay. And of course I turn and I continue teaching, and the drum has reached him, finally. And somehow, he has folded his arms up, so the entirety of each arm is filling each of his short shirt sleeves. Now at this point, I just keel over in laughter, because there's nothing else I can do. Right? I say, put your arms in your sleeves correctly, please. Oh, why didn't you just say that in the first place, he says, putting on his shirt correctly. Why am I bringing this up? I am bringing this up today because I'm thinking about what did I bring to that teaching? And what impact did I have on those students? I bring this up today because I think about, as I reflect on Unitarian and Universalist heritage and history and where we are today, there may be many instances when we've had an opportunity to make a choice that altered what would someday be the legacy of our faith tradition. For instance, one of my absolute favorite moments from Unitarian history, the Humanist Theist controversy. I really love this. So, back in the 1800s, people were migrating across the United States, and Unitarian missionaries were sent to minister to them. Mind you, this is going to be a story that is specifically from the Unitarian side of our history. Now, it was thought back then by Unitarian leaders that the future of Unitarianism was to be decided in the West. And it was in ways. Those leaders knew, with other religions expanding westward, in order to be relevant, Unitarianism must also expand. They may not have been able to predict, though, that this denomination of liberal Christians would become more and more liberal as they moved across the country. Ideas like transcendentalism, put forth by one-time Unitarian minister Ralph Waldo Emerson, would be met with much dispute back in the East, but the Midwest and West Coast would take these ideas on more readily. Unitarians in the West would form their own association separate from the more conservative Unitarians on the East Coast. The Free Religious Association formed, a group of Unitarians who believed that we should not be following Christ, but rather his principles, truth, righteousness, and love. They believed that religion and science could be reconciled. So there was a lot of fear in 1894 as the Unitarians held their national conference and reworked the preamble to their organizational constitution. Some people needed to hear that all Unitarians were Christians. Others outright opposed this idea. In the end, it was solved by saying that these churches, quote, work for the kingdom of God and, quote, accept the religion of Jesus, but that we are, quote, congregational in tradition and polity, and another quote, therefore nothing in this Constitution is to be construed as an authoritative test. So to explain all those quotes, in other words, they were saying they were all Christian, but if you weren't Christian, they wouldn't enforce Christianity upon you. These conversations were not easy, they were not comfortable, but they happened because people made a choice to speak out for the need for a more inclusive statement of faith. And indeed, at that time, that was probably a more inclusive statement of faith. So fast forward a few years. These theological questions continued to percolate within Unitarianism until they came to a head once again in 1921, 100 years ago, in the Unitarian newspaper, the Christian Register. This was part of what would later be called the Humanist Theist controversy. Throughout most of the year, there was a heated debate in the Christian Register between the Humanists and the Theists. Someone of one belief would write an article, then everybody would put their opinions out there in the letters to the editor. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to read through these newspapers and was struck by how much they reminded me of a modern-day political post on Facebook or on other social media. You might be familiar with what I'm talking about. You know, somebody brings up a point, possibly it's a good point, possibly it's not a good point. And things get complicated as people discuss it. Sometimes very good points are brought up, sometimes it kind of gets heated. And in fact, if you go online, you can probably do a search and find some of these magazines from 1920 yourself in digital format. Anyway, George Dodson, a theist, started the conflict with a scathing article called Clear Thinking or Death. I read you a little bit of it earlier, in which he informs the reader how ridiculous it would be if humanists were allowed to have a say in Unitarian theology. They must be a small minority of our faith, because Unitarians are definitely Christian, he thought. He claimed that he was not, quote, raising an issue, but it was the humanists who were pushing this theological debate to the forefront. John Dietrich, another Unitarian minister of the time, was a focal point of Dodson's frustrations. Dietrich had spoken of his humanist ministry at the National Conference the year before, as the responsibility of people to bring beauty to the world. And while he had no proof that God existed, he didn't deny the existence of a higher power. He claimed the label humanist, but he said he was neither a theist nor an atheist. Those labels didn't express his beliefs. In the course of the humanist-theist controversy, there were many good theological conversations. Some people reminded us that Unitarians are congregational. So if one congregation decides to hire a humanist minister to speak mostly to that point, they were free to do so. Others questioned whether or not it was time for Unitarians to adopt a creed that officially supports Christianity. Many people argued the merits of one theology over another. Eventually, after much argument, and even some name-calling. The words heretic and heretic hunter were used more than once. The controversy subsided, and humanists and theists existed together within Unitarianism. And as you will note from the reading from Curtis Reese earlier, we may or may not even agree with everything that was considered humanism at that time when we look back and we define humanism currently. In fact, even for those attending today, even among those who would call themselves humanists, there may be several definitions of what that term means. And that's okay. While humanist historical figures such as Dietrich and Reese may or may not have believed in a concept of God, they helped create a space within our faith tradition for people who don't believe in God. I think it's also possible that this debate eventually made it easier for those who are Buddhist, Muslim, Jewish, have earth-centered beliefs, and who are members of other traditions to find space within Unitarian Universalism, to join in community and congregation. They altered the path of our faith tradition. This is part of what I see as the beauty of our living tradition. We are not a static faith. We do not find one set of beliefs, expect everyone to conform, and without flinching, carry those beliefs to the end of our lives, to the end of eternity, without changing. We question. We're open to new viewpoints. And we are ready for new ideas. New ways of being, I might even say, new revelations in how we practice our faith. Even if those new ideas sometimes lead to some frustration or conversation. That's why I love going back far enough in our history to see events like the humanist-theist controversy. Because Dodson, Dietrich, Reese, and others made challenges and choices which shifted how people could be accepted in Unitarianism and Unitarian Universalism. And that's not the end of the story. Over the coming decades, more humanists would see their belief as excluding the possibility of deity, as lifting up logic and science, and making the statement that God could not exist. Also, humanism would become a prevailing way of belief within our faith tradition. And in 2003, Reverend Bill Singford gave a sermon encouraging Unitarian Universalists to reclaim and reintegrate language of reverence into our faith. His sermon sparked a conversation that continues in some UU churches today, throughout our denomination, discovering and rediscovering how we can practice this religion we call Unitarian Universalism, and the importance of a language of reverence in that practice. Singford's sermon saw some conflict arise because some people assumed that he was advocating for a full return to Christianity in Unitarian Universalism. And that wasn't his point. He was advocating that language of reverence helps us tune into whatever is deeper for each of us. I personally believe that his words both encouraged humanists among us to tune into what speaks to us deeply, and allows for more space for those of us who believe in some form of theism. Dietrich, the humanist, and Singford had perspectives on what makes our faith what it could be. And while their ideas spoke to different points, and were sometimes seen by people as being in conflict, they were both moving us toward openness and inclusion, shifting how we practice our faith in hopes of creating a fuller, more welcoming, beloved community. For many of us, that's what brought us to this place, a religious tradition which welcomed us when our beliefs might not have fit anywhere else, a space where we could feel at home in our fully realized identities. And here's what I'm thinking about a complex part of the idea of legacy. In ways, it's less a static piece of history, and more constantly intersecting and flowing through time. Like my story about my teaching at the beginning of the sermon. I realized with some thought that part of my legacy at that school was an attitude of compassion towards students. That's something returning students would speak about when they came back to see me. But that student in the drum circle with his arms up in the sleeves, his legacy of humor and humanity impacted me. His legacy impacted what my legacy can bring. He encouraged me to be more lighthearted about things that weren't so serious. In that way, we as Unitarian Universalists are both constantly impacted by the legacy that is left for us and creating something that will impact those that come after us. That's why I was overjoyed to see movement toward inclusivity and change in Unitarian Universalism in the past few years. For instance, after being asked to reimagine a more inclusive name for the Standing on the Side of Love campaign, one that more fully embraced people with disabilities, the campaign changed its name to Side with Love. Also, towards examining racism in UU institutions, a review commission is considering addition of an 8th principle stating the need to dismantle racism and oppressions in our churches and culture. And I think, if I recall correctly, there may be either a church or Unitarians in general in Canada who have actually adopted that 8th principle. I would have to go check my facts on that. But I know that there has been some recent news on that. Additionally, the work of the Committee on Institutional Change's 2020 report gave us a frank look at the topic of racism in our churches and how it plays out in those churches and institutions. Also, at General Assembly in 2016, a vote changed the words in our sources of faith, so that instead of affirming and promoting the words and deeds of prophetic women and men, it's now the words and deeds of prophetic people. This has supported and encouraged conversations about how to be more inclusive of those who identify beyond the gender binary within our movement. These changes are not always comfortable for everyone. That's true. They do ask us to examine how we can be most expansive in our faith, to love more, to shift our living tradition in ways that embrace humanity more fully. This is not always the easy path. It might be easier to stay static and unchanging. But I truly believe that we are called to more. We are called to more. May we continue growing, speaking up, having conversations, and loving deeply, developing this living tradition into tomorrow and beyond. May we continue to create a legacy that is more transformative for the Unitarian Universalism of those who will come after us. Amen and blessed be.
Soon the day will arrive when we will be together, and no longer will we live in fear. And the children will smile without wondering whether on that day thunder clouds will appear. Wait and see what a world this can be if we share, if we care, you and me. Wait and see what a world
As we come to the end of our worship today, I offer you these words by Reverend Eric Walker Wickstrom. The purpose of this community is to help its people grow. If you are who you were, and if the person next to you is who he or she was, if none of us has changed since the day we came in here, we have failed. The purpose of this community, of any church, temple, zendo, mosque, is to help its people grow. We do this through encounters with the unknown, in ourselves, in one another, in the other, whoever that might be for us, however hard that might be. Because these encounters have many gifts to offer. So, may you go forth from here this morning, not who you were, but who you could be. So may we all.
Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the light of love surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go. Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the light of love surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go.
I hope that you found meaning in today's service. Again, I invite you to consider joining us sometime on Sunday morning when we gather for worship as a community. The service starts at 10:30 a.m. on Zoom. You are also welcome to drop into our Zoom room coffee hour any Sunday at 11:30 for friendly conversation. Please refer to our website for more information on how to connect with us on Zoom. If you use the Connect Online button, it will take you directly to any of our activities. We look forward to meeting you.